Grace and peace to all of you resonating lights, you echoes of eternity, you children of the sacred. Welcome to another installment of The Gathering Echo. I am here with Brent Grigg, who broke bread with us on Sunday and helped us to begin to understand that we are all in this together, that every side of the road that leads from Calvary is level. And that all of us have a true identity, and that true identity is found in God. It's why we need God. It's why we believe in God. It's why we pursue God, and why God pursues us.
Absolutely.
And I would say that it was one of the best I've heard anyone put it together on Sunday when we get to talking about true identity and who we really are as divine beings, as more than mere mortals, as children of God. And that kind of is what, you see things happening all around. You see these companies making these decisions, and they're making these decisions based on hirings and on different positions that are being offered, and they use the term DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And tonight we want to talk about why the church needs a good, strong shot or healthy dose, as the more politically correct one of us would say, of DEI. But of course, what we're talking about isn't diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's divinity, enlightenment, and inclusion. Because we're not basing our belief in God on the color of any of our skin. We're not basing our belief in God on our biological or genetic makeup. We're basing our belief in God in the belief that we can find out who we truly are and live up to our true potential as divine beings. And with that, I'm going to let him take the floor, and we're going to bounce back and forth with some ideas, and we might read a few passages. I kind of want to get this guy's expertise, as he's an early church father, understudy, and has been has gotten his doctorate in that information and in that capacity, and he is very competent to have this discussion. So thank you for letting me join you tonight.
No, thank you.
In the wonderful word that God gave you, and hopefully we can expound upon that a little bit more.
I'm more of a nerd than anything. That's probably a better definition.
This is why it pays to have nerds as your friends, because they're smarter than you,
I won't say
and
that
they help you understand things more appropriately.
No, but I enjoyed getting to do it on Sunday. Like I always get to enjoy preaching. But so tonight we'll walk through a little bit of early church history, a little bit of what the gospel has sort of morphed into in modernity and how that sort of transitioned over time. And it'll get us back to this idea that the juiciest of them all, has given you about divinity, enlightenment, and inclusion. But one of them that when we were getting a lot of this kind of prepped and put together, one of them that I brought up on Sunday was George MacDonald, who was the novelist, writer, pastor, preacher, minister during the mid to late 1800s, going into the 1900s. But he was an influence, one of the heaviest influences of C.S. Lewis. He was one of the greatest Christian novelists. Him, J.R. Tolkien, and Lewis Carroll, by the way. A lot of people don't realize how much Lewis Carroll was influenced by George MacDonald. But there was something that was reading through some of his sermons that he had not really delivered. They're called unspoken sermons, just things. Because once you get into stuff like this, it's not as widely accepted for whatever reason. Yeah. And I've got my opinions on that. A lot of that comes back to the Calvinism and the neo-Calvinism that's around now, but I think a lot of it comes back to that, this heavy influence by somebody, which we can get into a little bit of that later too. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but
you go where you want to go.
Yeah, just the thing about the Calvinism is that it was heavily influenced. The same time John Calvin came about during the time of Martin Luther, which is just shortly after Martin Luther. Martin Luther, obviously preaching that salvation is not by works, it's not by penance, it's not by purchasing it through the church, it's through the grace through faith. And then John Calvin would say the same thing. However, he starts studying Augustine of Hippo, and gets a lot of his stuff from Aquinas and Augustine. and how Augustine, who is a post-Nicene father, because if we go through a little bit of that history, you've got the pre-Nicene fathers, the first, which Nicaea was the first council where they began to decide, this is what we believe, and let's try to put this together, not just you believe that, you believe that, you believe that. What if we just put it together? Let's try to put the gospel together, kind of like, somebody that might believe something a little bit differently than the way you believe it, and let's just see where we end up.
Right.
Kind of like, let's all come to the table and let's be inclusive.
We share our thoughts and ideas, and we're free to speak them to each other and risk the offense of finding what the truth really is, because that is the endeavor of speaking the truth. That is the endeavor of living the truth, is once you have it, you're going to risk offending someone with it.
Yeah.
If you speak to a group of 100 people, there's a good chance that something you say may offend at least one person.
Yeah.
No matter where you are, no matter what you're talking about, if what you're speaking about is truth. It is truth.
Fun fact about offense was in that very first council, Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, actually hit somebody. He struck a guy. He hit Arius, who was the proponent of Arianism, which didn't jive with their belief of a high elevated view of Jesus, of his divinity. And it always brought Jesus back down to, well, he was just a man. And so Santa Claus gets up and punches him in the face. So he was offended by that. It's like, I don't like this man-like version of Jesus. I like the divine version of Jesus.
And in that moment, he realized he became too powerful and turned to sugars and sweets and cookies to no longer strike anyone, but only offer gifts of diabetes and presents.
Gingerbread cookies and stockings. But anyways, going away from the Calvinism, you've got Martin Luther, who at that time is preaching grace through faith in Germany. Just shortly after that, you've got John Calvin. So these are the two great reformers, or two great leaders of the Reformation, leading out of Catholicism and into what was known as Protestantism, which is just a freedom to be away from the Catholic Church, be something wholly separate but still Christian. John Calvin began to read a lot of this Augustine stuff and picked up the term election and picked up the term predestination. And then it morphs into something absolutely horrible. If you read a lot of this stuff, it turns into where John Calvin is saying, literally on paper, that God has decided, and we don't know who it is, but God has already pre-decided that this person is going to burn in eternal conscious torment in hell. This person's going to experience the joys and pleasures of heaven. And we don't know who that is. And the only way that you can even truly sort of know who that is somewhat by their actions. If they act a certain way, if they behave a certain way, then we know that that person is obviously one of the elect. And what makes that whole doctrine despicable even more is that you hear a lot of positivity around John Calvin because he wouldn't get into sort of the below the belt conversations that Martin Luther would get into. Martin Luther was kind of brash and abrasive and said some stuff that would be considered kind of, tawdry, sort of
relate to this.
Exactly. So he would write fart jokes. He did that a lot, which was really strange for a reformer to write crude jokes like that. But John Calvin didn't get into that. So Martin Luther at some point has this back and forth dialogue from Germany to France.
Think about that just for a second. You have, and I know it's funny, right? I like fart jokes. I think the word poop is the funniest word in the English language. You can't say it without smirking a little bit.
You can't hear that.
And I know all of you just did. So poop, enjoy that. But think about what he's standing for and what he's opposing.
Yep.
And in all of this, he's writing fart jokes. Like a kid.
Yep.
Like a child.
He was.
He's being a child of God, and because he's being himself, and discovered who he really is. See, that's where I think Luther is relatable to Marcus Aurelius, who I've been talking about, where his actions and his behavior seem to be in avoidance of being dyed purple with the robes of religion.
Yep.
Because, there's an argument at least to be made that, one of the 6 theological schools that emerge in the early church days is Carthage or Rome. And the argument being made by a lot of intellectuals, especially today and now, is that Rome never really fell. It became the church.
Yeah.
Because out of all of those 6 theological schools that existed from that time, the church or the theological school in Carthage or Rome was the only one that taught eternal punishment in hell.
Right.
It's the only one. And here you have this guy who's,
just living free.
He's being a kid. It's a man walking around like a kid. And if you read the Gnostic Gospels, that is how Jesus is depicted by the disciples or by the people that wrote those works.
Yeah.
Is that he's smiling, he's joking around. He has a kid-like demeanor all the time.
Yep.
He's not this somber, silent savior that's walking around with purpose every chance he gets. He's called the laughing Jesus in a lot of the works that you read. So you have this man who in his time is opposing another man who's, arguably in influence, competence, ability, skill, notoriety, an equal or greater.
Yep.
And he's able to accomplish delivery of more truth.
Yes.
While simultaneously talking about fart jokes and poop.
That's exactly right.
Like a kid. Where this other guy, deadly serious.
He is. But also, one of the worst things about John Calvin is that he was, towards the middle to end of his pastoring portion of his career, there was a man that came in from out of town that he and the other reformers, and these are not Catholics, these are Protestant reformers, they didn't like him. They didn't like his theology. They didn't like what he believed. So they worked together to have this man put to death, to have him executed. When John Calvin wrote it, he said the man should be beheaded. Well, ultimately, the man ends up getting burned at the stake because of what John Calvin had written down. Now, you take somebody's theology, and that matches the life that he had, where God is angry, and God, much like a pagan idea of Zeus or some other type of God, that God has to be appeased in some way, and it leads into the precursor of what ultimately became the idea of penal substitution, which there is a little bit of that if you read it through in the book of Romans and the book of Galatians. There is a penalty and there is a substitution, that Christ was the one who was vicariously in our place, or who vicariously lived as opposed to us being there. But it's not the penalty to sin on the sinner. It says that Jesus was the one who in the flesh condemned sin in the flesh. Right. So it's not that Christ was the one receiving the punishment of God as an angry father. It's that sin, the thing that would destroy you, the thing that hurts you, the thing that harms you, all of God's wrath was poured out on the thing that hurts his creation. Mm. All of God's wrath is poured out on the thing that rips you apart. And he says, I'm done with that. I'm done with my child being ripped to shreds. I'm done with my children being torn apart. I'm going to destroy the thing that destroys them. And he does it through the person of Jesus Christ. So we have somebody like John Calvin, though, who sees it the other way around, that God has to be appeased in some way, and that you're the problem. You're the one that's the one that God is angry at. And so when some guy comes in from the outside and says, we don't like his theology, we don't like the way he believes, he writes out, we need to have this man put to death. And it happened. It was not something that was just discussed and that these were, he's like throwing out a platitude or something like that. No, this actually happened. The man was put to death by the government that they colluded with to have him killed. But you have somebody like that. Then you fast forward, that's, a couple thousand years, or not really 1,000 years at that point. You go from John Calvin.
Let me throw this comment.
Do this.
Because he starts reading into Augustine, but then clearly he's not studying Augustine completely.
No, because even Augustine would say the opposite.
Because Augustine makes the comment and has to admit, now this Augustine lived 354 to 430. He's of African descent and one of the 4 great Latin or Afro church fathers. But he admitted in his belief that there are very many in our day who thought, not denying the Holy Scriptures, do not believe in endless torments. Mm-hmm. So even he was grappling with the idea that this whole idea that you have to appease God or you're going to be tormented and punished endlessly forever was not something that he was firmly cemented in.
No, it wasn't.
It back and forth. it's fluid, right? He never settles on that issue. And then for someone like that to come along, all that keeps ringing in my ear is, you don't know what manner of spirit you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's where John Calvin doesn't remember who he is.
Doesn't.
And because he doesn't, he attains power instead of competence, and that power destroys.
Absolutely.
It excludes. It eliminates your ability to ever attain the identity of your divinity and ever achieve true enlightenment to your purpose.
Right.
So he's the reason why the church needs DEI.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's that spirit is the reason why we need to understand and remember who we are. But keep going. A couple thousand years.
First in the first century writers like Irenaeus, and then you go through Athanasius and Gregory of Nyssa and all these others, these first century pre-Nicene fathers who wrote, that's what they wrote about.
Right.
That's all that they wrote about. Incarnation, divinity, equality, and I already forgot the E now. Or the enlightenment. That was what they were. They were enlightened, and then including everybody in what Jesus Christ had already done. For instance, something that Irenaeus had said is the glory of God is the living man, and the life of man is the vision of God. The fact that God has become man, indeed flesh, proves that the redemption and resurrection of the entire earthly world is not just a possibility, but it is reality. So the reality is what Christ did, not something that's future to come, but something that is a living reality now because of the incarnation. And the only true and steadfast teacher, the Word of God, our Lord Jesus Christ, through his transcendent love, became what we are, that he might bring us to be what he is himself. So, again, when I talked about this on Sunday, I used the term vicarious humanity, or the vicarious life, the vicarious humanity of Christ, which is it's a term that refers to the fact that Christ in his humanity stands in our place and represents us. So that is what is true of his humanity is true of us. And what he did in his humanity, he was doing in our humanity. So it pushes us and melds us together, like the way N.T. Wright says, it's like it overlaps and interlocks. What Christ did, it overlaps and interlocks with our humanity. And that's what makes it miraculous. The doctrine of incarnation, it doesn't end simply with God becoming man in the person of Jesus. The doctrine goes on to ask the question and explain, why would God become what we are? So the doctrines taken, again, from the Nicene, the pre-Nicene.
That's a good question, though.
It is.
Let's go down that rabbit hole.
So I want to. Why would God become?
Let's do it.
Why would God become what we are? For one, the pre-Nicenes would say it was for that particular reason, that God, through the person of Christ, would redeem us. Now, that gets morphed after the Council of Nicaea, and you get into the Council of Chalcedon later on, which is where they began to argue about, well, was he really divine or was he really human?
Right.
And what they start doing is they try to break down what the early church fathers believed. It's not good enough. They have to make their mark. This is my opinion on it. I think
it's the deist movement, where it's more of the intellectual picking apart of past beliefs. You're not really creating anything new. You're just kind of picking apart and picking and choosing what you like and dislike about what other people are believing.
And it was in the Council of Chalcedon, thankfully, where they do say there was the condemnation of Nestorianism and the Apollonianism, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly, which both of them really say that it was, a man named Jesus, but his human mind was plucked out of him and God somehow, invaded his body. It was really weird. It's kind of like alien invasion, kind of the way that they were explaining it. They didn't have the terms for aliens, I guess, but that's the way that they're explaining that Jesus was like this being that was inhabited by another being from beyond this world, and so
body snatched.
So they condemn it at the Council of Chalcedon. But again, as you move through that and go into like what you were talking about, you have the School of Alexandria and Ephesus, which Alexandria becomes what's now sort of like the Coptic Christians, which we don't hear a lot about.
Yeah,
we don't hear a lot about their version of the Bible, which has like another. We've got 66 books. They've got almost 100 books,
and
they include
90-something.
all these things that Josh talks about, the Gnostic Gospels, Judas, Thomas, the sayings of Jesus, the Solomon's sayings, they include that in their Bible. So it's excluded from ours because, we don't agree with that, or we don't like that, or because
it's in mine.
It's in mine.
I'll tell you that. Well, they got tossed to the side because they were one of the 4 schools that were considered and divided out of the group as universalists.
They did. They were.
Universalism.
Yeah.
So that's how they got pegged, that's how they got marked, and that's how they got excluded from the conversation.
Yeah.
And now we know so very little about so very many that had a lot of information that if we were to read it in church today, we wouldn't recognize what it is. It's wild to think about, because as soon as you get away from divinity, you start to lose your ability to reach enlightenment, and then you squander every chance you get to include God's people. Exclusion becomes the name of the game. It's the assumption and consumption of power that becomes the business of the church. It was the business of the Roman Empire that became the Roman Church.
That's right.
And it's still the business today. Now, we're not alone. We're not standing here saying we're the only ministry or the only people that are stepping outside of the box and going into these arenas and conversations and having these dialogues. Elijah is a lesson enough in himself to know that that's not true. Right. But it's high time we take back the language of God's people. It's not about diversity and equity. All things are equitable when divinity is considered first. Yeah. When you look at every single person that you encounter and every single person that you talk to as a child of God, as a divine being, regardless of what they look like, where they came from, where they grew up, where they went to school, did they go to school or not, none of that matters. From the wino to the politician to the prostitute to the businessman. They're all God's children. Yeah. And if you see them as they really are, it will open your eyes to exactly what God is doing in this earth. That enlightenment will lead you to the necessary path of including everyone without prejudice and bias that's based in the material world.
That's right.
Because none of those things matter. Why did Jesus come and look like us? To show us we're not bound by this material world. No. He's going to win the battle, and all you have to do, like you brilliantly brought out Sunday, is be. Yeah. You don't have to become anything. Can I throw that Dune line in right here?
Do it.
I just think it's appropriate. I've watched the movie Dune recently, and I'm a comic book nerd, and I like sci-fi stuff, so judge me. I'm going to watch it anyway. The new one's coming out in March, and I am stoked. But my daughter Ava likes it, so we watched it together. We watched it like 2 or 3 times. There is this conversation that the Duke of Atreides, that's the House Atreides, that's, in a universal context, this is on a different planet. It's a human species of people. They've reached prominence, and now they've been given the charge to go and be the steward of another planet that is producing this substance that allows the galaxy, it's called spice, to travel between stars. Now, the backstory on that is that planet was set up to be a utopia, a green place with running water. But the powers that be, the empire, didn't care about the people, didn't care about their lives and the suffering of the desert, because they had money to be made from that sand and that desert. So these people are left to live in caves and caverns, and they've been oppressed their whole lives for this substance, this treasure that's on their planet, that all of them would do away with to save more of themselves. Right. They would sacrifice all of that spice, all of that money, all of that power just to live and have a planet to expand their gardens. I hope we're putting together a lot of the sermons that have been coming through, because a lot of it is relatable with what a lot of them will be talking about. But the Duke of Atreides is having a conversation with his son Paul. And Paul is a young boy, and he's full of spirit, and he's been training in combat, and he's ready to go into combat because They're going into this new planet. He's never left his planet before. He's ready to go use these skills. He's accumulated them. He trains with one of the generals in the army. He's ready. He's ambitious. He wants to go. And his father tells him that he can't go because he's the future of House Atreides. See, the future doesn't belong to us. What God shows us is the future belongs to his children. Yeah. It's always the next generation that the future belongs to. And this father is having this conversation with his son. Yeah. And of course, through the conversation, he's talking about all these skills and that his grandfather fought bulls when he was a young man. And his dad kind of laughs and says, yeah, well, what do we learn from that? Not a good idea, right? But then he admits to his son, well, I didn't want to be the Duke either. When I was your age, I wanted to be a pilot. But my grandfather told me that I was the future of House Atreides. Mm-hmm. So then he makes this statement. And for the life of me, I've rewound it and watched it probably 50 times. And it tore me up every time I watched it. His son says the statement, says, Dad, what if I'm not the future of House Atreides? Because he's having these dreams and these visions, and it seems to be leading him down a different path than the path of his father, than the path of House Atreides. So he's asking this question genuinely as a son, as a child who doesn't know what's about to happen. Mm-hmm. He's being called into the unknown. Yeah. And he still has his father to talk to. So he's asking, what if I'm not the future of House Atreides? And his father says, a great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it. Yeah. But if your answer is no, then you'll still be the only thing I've ever needed you to be, my son.
Oh my gosh. Goodness.
I hope you hear the voice of God.
Yes.
If your answer is no, Jonah, even though your answer was no, yeah, you're still the only thing I've ever needed you to be, my son. Yeah. And if my son calls to me, then I'll answer him. And he'll answer the call. The father ends the conversation with his son by saying, I found my way to it. And you'll find your way. Saying what? It's not going to look the same. No. Your path isn't my path. I can't tell you what your path's going to be. But I know what you're called to. I know what your potential is. I see the divinity that lives within you. I know you'll reach the place of remembering who you are. Yeah. And by doing so, you will include everyone that's ever been oppressed, everyone that's ever been cast out, everyone that's ever been condemned, and bring them God. Right. I couldn't get away from it. It hit me so hard because that's who I heard. I heard the voice of God. And you can say that's crazy if you want to.
No, that's it.
But in the movie, he's being a father. But even in the movie, he's more than a father by saying that. That's not just a father's sentiment. That's someone who knows more than just the biological, physical connection of father and son. It's an enlightened conversation. And instead of excluding his son for not having the answer he wanted that day, he includes him in the solution. Yeah. Just like Jesus included us in the solution.
And first is offered in the garden.
Yes.
Has the same conversation with his dad.
Right. Yeah.
Right? If there's any way, is there any way possible for this to go any other way than what it has to do? And in the garden, he says, if this is the only way to do it, then so be it. Surrenders himself to it, drinks of the cup, and gladly takes on the will of his father, believing that. And see, this is the thing too that I kept thinking when you're going through that. It's the Pauline letter to the Corinthians that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, then gives the ministry of reconciliation to all of us. Yeah. That it is now, because you've been reconciled, it is now your responsibility to go out and make sure that everybody feels the reconciliation, that everybody understands the ministry. And if I'm not mistaken, I think ministry there, the word is diakonos, which is like to serve. Yeah. The serving of, it's almost like God ordered for everybody at the table. God already placed the order for everybody at the table and said, everybody here gets reconciliation. Oh, you wanted steak? Oh, you get reconciliation. Everybody gets reconciliation. And then he gives you the ministry, the service of reconciliation. You've been reconciled. Go lay this reconciliation down right in front of somebody else. Go lay this right down in front of them and let them partake of it. Let Christ be the bread of which we all feed on. Let Christ be the blood of which we all drink. His wine, his blood, his bread, his body. Partake of this reconciliation.
Yeah.
Live it.
Right.
But that's if I'm understanding what you're saying, which I think we're here, it's you read this poem on Sunday. You had me read it, and it was horrible. I cried through the whole thing. So,
well, I got it again, so we can read it again. But
I was going to say
it wasn't horrible.
It was. I break every rule when I preach. By the way, it's every rule that you're supposed to keep of not getting too emotional, getting too loud, and crying. I break all those rules, not intentionally. It just happens. But I'm a product of this. I'm a product of being served reconciliation. It's like it excites me and it makes me happy and it makes me joyful, but it brings me to tears at the same way. But I started reading through this poem. Go ahead and read through it because it brings back that same idea of what you're saying of father to son. And if you're no more than just my son, then you're everything exactly what I've wanted you to be from the time that you were born. And then seeing yourself in that light, it causes you then to see everybody else in the same way.
There's on that point, it's such a good point that you make. They bring up the grandfather in the conversation. There's no way that he didn't know his father in the same way he's revealing himself to his son.
Right.
He wouldn't know that about himself if he didn't know that about his father. Mm-hmm. That's why we've talked about so many times, if you stare into the abyss, the unknown, what terrifies you, what you don't know what's going to happen. If you stare into it long enough, it stares back into you. What do you see? You see your father. And you see the fathers before him. And you see all of the potential that's been successful and all of the potential that's been unsuccessful. And it gives you what you need to take your next step into that abyss, because that's where the adventure awaits.
Absolutely.
But this poem, it hit me. I'd had it in the queue for feels like months, and I didn't know what to do with it. And then Sunday you go and deliver that, and I was just like, man, he's already choked up, so let's go ahead and let him read this and watch the waterworks.
Yeah, this is the after effect of the stream, by the way. So if you want to hear stuff like this in person and be a part of it, come sit here with us and feel that, because this all happened after the stream ended, and we had a moment. Like, we had a God moment for a while.
Well, we rock out before we do the stream.
We do.
So, I mean, if you're interested in listening to good music, I think it's pretty good. The audience clearly agrees. I'm just kidding. Just kidding, guys. And then after the service, after the stream, it's wherever the Spirit may lead us.
Right.
If that's a prayer line, if someone needs prayer, if someone needs help, if someone needs a conversation, a shoulder to cry on, if God starts moving and we have an altar call, all those things are available. We don't have a B-roll for a reason. It's because we don't want people to feel uncomfortable in their moment, in their private moments, sharing that with God and sharing that with others. So if you need a place like that to come, you need not a church, but a sanctuary that will let you be exactly who you are, the way you are. Come as you are. This is the place for it. 1510 Hargrove Avenue, Gastonia, 28052. I'll read this poem now. Enough plugging. I feel his spirit which moves me. I feel his love which comforts me. I feel his peace amidst strife. I see splendor, majesty, miracles. I see character. I see God in the grass, the trees, the mountains, the rivers, the oceans. I see God in the ghettos, the palaces, the hills, and the valleys. I see God in the AIDS clinic and in the food banks. I see him in tears and in laughter. He is everywhere. He is all around me. He is within me. But what does God look like? Well, he looks like you and he looks like me, he is beautiful. Jennifer Slater wrote that. I mean, we don't think that way.
No.
We don't live and operate in our daily lives that way. And shame on us for that. Shame on us for that.
Yeah.
Can't be ashamed of God. And I'm sitting beside a God.
Right.
Shame on us for not realizing that we're sitting in the presence of divinity.
Yeah.
Everywhere we go where there is another living being. Why would we not have a conversation? Why would we allow the cares, the toils, and the labors of this world to bog us down to the extent where we're not even hospitable? We don't want to be talked to. We want to be left alone.
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to share anyone's burden. I feel burdened down myself.
Yeah.
But his yoke is easy and his burden is light.
Right.
Are we living what we're teaching? Are we living what we're preaching? We try to. It's not to condemn anyone because Christ himself didn't come to condemn. So I hope no one feels condemned by me saying that. But it's a perspective. It's an understanding of, man, some of the things that I've said to people. Some of the ways that I've treated people. Some of the ways I've been to myself. To the people I care about the most. If I strip away everything I know about this life, and I walk in the understanding that each and every one of those people is a child of God, a divine being, just like me. There's things that I need to make right, and not just with myself, and not just because it looks good. This isn't the DEI of faux virtue. This isn't man-made idea or morality that makes us feel good and accomplishes next to nothing for the ambitions of men and women, the character of men and women, and the soul of men and women.
Modern DEI is just another form of the law of Moses.
It's trash.
Trying to legislate what somebody should feel through seeing the divinity of another individual. If you see the divinity of another individual, then there is no need for a legislator or a lawmaker to tell you what you can and cannot love, or what you cannot include, what you can and cannot hire. You're trying to legislate morality, and that never works. It did not work in the Old Testament with Israel. It does not work today. But the base level of coming into what scholars talk about, and the term is inaugurated eschatology. The inaugurated eschatology says you're already indwelt by the Spirit. You're not awaiting something to happen. You're already one with Christ. You're already a new human. And the response to that is then act like it.
Right.
Behave like it. Behave like you are brand new. Behave like you are indwelt by the Spirit. Because when you do, you might not go through the self-checkout line. And if you do go through the self-checkout line, then maybe you'll be open eternally to the people that are around you, that you'll see God within that other person, and you might, just for a second, be able to glimpse into their woundedness and be able to offer them some form of help or hope or gladness. Give them some sort of joy for their mourning, because you believed, and it's not just knowing that you're indwelt by the Spirit and already, not waiting, because what we always heard back in the day was, one day I'll get my glorified body, and one day I'll be, But all that does is just, it precludes you from saying that, well, what's the point of working out? What's the point of eating healthy? What's the point of doing anything that matters? Because if that's the case, then what's the point of all the other rules and regulations of not cussing, not drinking, not wearing a certain type of clothes? Why all these rules and not this? Right. Why is it all the rules about what I can wear, what I can say, what I can drink, what I can eat, but not about my diet, my exercise, the way that I treat my wife, the way that I treat my friends and family? None of that gets brought into play. But here's the thing. If you see yourself inaugurated, if you see yourself in the beginning, that when Christ died, that something and rose, that something began. We all were renewed. We all walked into new creation, new life. Now, everything matters. Every single thing matters. Right. My diet, my exercise, my relationships, the people that are around me. Every single thing matters because I'm living the theology of John. Now, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, they had great theology, but when it came to the personhood of Jesus Christ, or the hypostatic union, or the hypostasis of Christ, it came down to him being fully God and fully man for the purpose of understanding what it was like to be human, not for us to become more like God, but for him to be more like us, to show us what John called the way, the truth, and the life. Therefore, Christ becomes the way, the truth, and the life by being human, fully God and fully man, and shows us the way, the truth, and the life.
To be
yes,
the way,
yes,
the truth, and the life.
Absolutely.
That is the process.
Right.
That is the understanding. Why else would he go through all of this symbolic human torture, punishment, and suffering?
Right.
To complete this task, if not to show us, I voluntarily lay my life down here.
Right.
Because there's more that awaits, there's more that comes, and if you'll follow the way, the truth, and the life, me, the I am, you will realize you are, and then you'll become the I am for your people.
Right.
It's a continuous promulgation
Yes.
of Christ in you.
And that's what I've always thought that Paul meant in his letter to Colossians.
Agreed.
When he tells the Colossians, whatever you do in word and in deed, do it in the name, which can also be translated as character, in the personhood. Do it in the name of Jesus Christ. Yeah. So it's not just, and you would have you'd have to take into account what he said in Galatians chapter 2, what he said in the book of Romans, where it says that not I'm dead. Yeah. Reckon yourself dead. Consider yourself dead, and that you are alive in Christ. I think that's Romans 6. Galatians 2, where he says, it's the famous line that says, I've been crucified with Christ, yet I live. Right. But yet not I, but Christ that lives. Right. Therefore, everything that you do, to the church in Colossia, everything that you do in word and in deed, do it in the name, in the personhood, in the hypostasis of Christ. Do it in the being of Christ, because you no longer exist. Yeah. Now you're trying to bring up an old existence that is not there. Your existence is gone because now you are existing as Christ, even though it looks like Josh. It looks like me. It looks like you. It looks like us, but it truly is the Christ.
Right.
And living that out, like you said, it brings you into this understanding of including everybody in what the New Testament calls, it's the apokatastasis is the word that's used, the Greek word. It's the reconciliation of all things. Right. That God's ultimate goal was to set things right. Set things right and in order, but not just through this divine snap of a finger. Because if that were the case, then God would have done it. Right. There would be no Jesus. There would be no you. There would just be God. And God, in his all-powerful way, would snap his finger and suddenly everything is reconciled, everything's fixed, everything's done. But instead, he sends Jesus, born of a virgin, not of the will of men, but of the will of God. He lives a life as a normal human being, as God living in a normal human being, suffers the most gruesome death that you possibly could have. So when Jesus comes to you in your pain, whether it's at your death or at your difficult points in your life, I assure you, he knows your pain. Yes. He knows exactly what you are going through because he's gone through worse himself, a death at the hands of the mob, being falsely accused, wrongly crucified, and still yet says, Father, forgive them. Still offers forgiveness and reconciliation. Why? Because he's teaching us the exact same thing. That God, his purpose was to set the world right, not by a snap of the magical finger, but through the lives of people living as God, living as Christ. You have been God's plan all along.
Right.
And you would have to have gone through your suffering, gone through your difficulty, maybe even go through your death that brings you to the same resurrection of Jesus to set the world right, to truly judge the earth. It's fascinating to me when you go into court, because I've seen you in action, and I think it's fantastic. I love it. It's the confidence that's there and everything. But it's you go before a judge for the sake of something being wrong.
Right. And
the judge is there, not in our minds, and especially in the good old Pentecostal minds, it's and about living right. It's we need the judge is going to put a condemnation. Somebody's going to be accused. Somebody's going to go to jail for this. Somebody's going to be punished for this.
Drop the hammer.
Yeah, drop the hammer down on them. Yeah. But really, the purpose of the judge is not for the purpose of condemning and just sending people off to eternal conscious torment, or what we call jail, is sending them off to that.
True.
The purpose is to set it right, make the situation right. And sometimes what that looks like is, yes, somebody goes to jail for a certain amount of time to attempt to rehabilitate that person and try to help them understand what they got wrong in their life so that they can understand how they relate to society around them. On the other side of that, somebody who has been done wrong, somebody who is suing because of, you name it, whatever the situation might be, they are going before the judge pleading, saying, I was done wrong in some way, and I am asking for you to find a way to make it right. So when we go to God as judge and we say, Lord, set the world right, he turns right around and looks at us the same way that a judge would, standing before the plaintiff and a defendant. God, see, that's why I have you. Standing before a plaintiff and a defendant, and somebody is either going to be punished for something, or they're going to go through whatever rehabilitation that the judge decides. But at the end of that session, at the end of that court, when it's adjourned, at some point the judge is going to believe that he has done something to make it as right as he possibly can. And that's what God does with us. He turns around and says, go make the world right. And sometimes what that looks like is going through our own hell consciously until we are worked out all of these things that are within us, going through the fire that burns up the hay, the wood, and stubble, so that the gold, the precious stones, and the silver are the things that remain in our life. Not because of punishment, not because somebody needs to be paid off, and not because somebody got it wrong, but because you are called to be the reconciler of the world. You are called to be the one through whom God gives the ministry of reconciliation to all mankind. So everything that you do it in word and in deed, knowing that you are reconciled to God, that you are one with him. Therefore, behave like it, act like it, live like it.
And see, even with the judicial system that we have, which is imperfect,
it is, yeah,
but it's one of the best in the world that we have here in the United States, and I'm grateful to be a part of the bar and to do what I'm able to do, because I do believe that I can help people, right? Because we have deeper conversations than just the right and wrong of the black and white letter of the law.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have conversations like these, and sometimes it really makes a difference, and it's so rewarding to see one of God's children stand up out of a situation like that, facing consequences like that, and emerge victorious regardless of the material consequence, in the same way that Christ emerges victorious out of the depths of hell with the keys, despite the material consequences he suffered in this life and in this world. But how far we have come from sitting in the seat of judgment and what a judge should do. I'll read this to you because this is out of the Stoic tradition, but it's the word judgment, which comes from the Greek hupolepsis, which means also to grasp a decision or a choice. But they looked at it like this. They looked at judgment like this. It is the faculty by which we perceive and assess the impressions which affect the soul. So what have you been exposed to that has led you to make this soul tie so deep within you and in the darkest part of you?
The impressions that affect the soul.
The impressions. You're perceiving and assessing the impressions, the impressionable things. Bad bad fellowship corrupts good manners.
Yeah.
Right? That impression, and we all know this as parents. If your kid hangs out with a bully, they're going to wind up acting like a bully. That impression has affected their soul. They have seen some type of dopaminergic response to that type of stimuli that they can get themselves physically. And God's not looking for us to make that connection physically, but make that connection spiritually.
Absolutely.
So then you get to what I think is even better, which is hegemonikon, which is the guiding part or the governing part, also known as the ruling part of us. Greek and Roman philosophers viewed the human soul as composed of parts or aspects, which can be either in harmony or in conflict with each other. We have talked about this in the discussion of the light and darkness within each of our own souls that we have to contend with. Right ordering, as you were talking about, and it was just perfect, consists in allowing the naturally rational part to control the lower appetitive parts, with the result of being a harmonia of the entire person. Vice and unhappiness result from a kind of inner mutiny in which the lower appetitive parts rule over the rational, and the latter works in the service of the former. So what are we talking about there? These dark proclivities that we have, they will overtake the good proclivities, the light proclivities that you have, and they will use those in service of attaining their wants and desires. How much more so if you put things in a right order and your rational self begins to rationalize the understanding that I am more than just a human being. I am a God inhabiting a human being, and as such, I shouldn't be given over to the dark appetites of myself. Instead, I should have the dark appetites that I have in service of the light or good that I can do. And that will avoid becoming Caesarified. That will avoid becoming dyed purple or becoming anything. That allows you to take your hands off and say, I am. The same way God said, I am in the man and the person of Jesus Christ. And that power and that impact and that impression on the soul is the judgment that we're talking about in Revelation. That's the judgment that's talked about with God. It's the impression that reveals to you who you really are, because now you know who you're really dealing with. The I am stood up in Jesus Christ, and that revealed to everyone in that vicinity who they should be and who they could be. And that's a judgment. That's perceiving and assessing the impression on the soul. If only they would. And that gets us full circle back to the Nietzsche quote. Of the measure of your spirit is how much truth you're willing to tolerate. Without diluting it, without sweetening it, without falsifying it, without taking anything away from it. That's paraphrasing, but the idea is it's all the truth that's in front of you, if only you would. All truth, all knowledge, all understanding, which means all of God. And we've talked about that before. We've had multiple conversations about the fullness of God.
And I think that what everything you're saying, it does two things. For one, I think it does answer the question that we talked about earlier, that it's, why would God become man? What would be the purpose behind this? And it's for that very reason, is that it brings the harmonia, it brings the harmony within the being that you have once, for one, that we've talked, like you were referring to, we've talked about God dealing with darkness in the beginning, that God begins in darkness and then suddenly deals with this darkness. And then by the time you hear James referring to God, he's the Father of lights with whom there is no darkness, there is no shadow that he casts due to change, because he's a being of light. And then you'd have what the other apostles said, that God is light and in him there is no darkness. Well, he didn't start out like that, it appears. Not through the evolution of God, through at least the Judaic or Judahite tradition, the Judaahite mythology, because at that point even it gets crowded by other people, or shrouded by different theologians through the years. But Judahite believers believe that God had a wife, and that's where Astarte comes from. So you've got lots of different mythologies that go there, but also you've got the different mythologies that relate to different versions of how they related to God with Abraham calling God the God of a certain mountain range called El Shaddai. And you've got we've talked about the names of God, the El Roy, all that stuff. It was their relation to how they experienced God in that moment. But when you bring all of those experiences of God together in the person of Jesus, then you answer the question, for one, why would God come in the flesh? For the purpose of, one, showing all of these different variations and iterations of God, and what Hebrews chapter 1 said, that in diverse times and in diverse ways, God has revealed himself over the centuries.
Oh, you mean divinity's already diverse?
Divinity was diverse already.
So we can change the deal.
We can. Divinity is already diverse because divinity has been showing himself in diverse ways and in different manners at different times. So here comes Jesus to give true definition singularly to all of those variations, to all of those iterations. And here's Jesus Christ living what ultimately is translated by Paul in the Greek word is pleroma. And what the Gnostics talked about was, they had all kinds of mythology around it, and some of it gets a little hairy and some of it not. But when you put it together, there's one of them specifically. The reason I gave my daughter her middle name is Sophia was because of the sophiology of the ideas behind that. Is the spirit of wisdom. So it's a female. It's female wisdom. So you take all of the ologies.
They did wake up first.
They did.
They did eat the fruit first.
Yep.
And they did bring it to us. So,
and prophetically, I wanted her to be that person. I want her to be that person that is awakened, that has this awareness of her godness, and for whatever reason, she does in so many different ways. And it's beautiful to me to watch her experience God the way that she does. That's unique, completely unique to the way it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was all the same way. I think we all experienced it probably the same way. It's, praying in the altar, filled with the Holy Ghost. For her, it's entirely and wholly different.
Right.
It's found not always in hearing Bible stories. Now, she can quote more Bible stories to you than probably anybody in this whole church, but the other thing that she loves to do is read about mythology. For one, she's finding it even more in the Percy Jackson novels. And what she does, she takes the Percy Jackson novel, and then she goes and does her own research on the actual, what the real mythology, I know, right? What the real mythology said, because, Percy was not Perseus was actually the son of Zeus in the real mythology, but Percy Jackson is the son of Poseidon. Spoiler alert if you've never read the novels. But
Ava, if you're watching this, this is how to score brownie points with
This is it. But there is one thing that's found. So because she's reading it, when she gets done with the book, I read some of it. I've only done one of them. She's on book number 4 now. So I'm way behind. So I've gotten through the first book, but the thing that hit me right off the bat in the very first book is that Percy is given a pen. And you know that the writer, the author is Rick Riordan. You know that he is the one who's heard the phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword, because the pen becomes a sword that he defeats these evil beings with. And it's the Logos. It's the same thing that's found in the book of Revelation, that it's not a sword in the hand of Jesus. It says the sword is in his mouth. Right. So it's through the eternal Logos that he's able to cut away all these other things that make us not understand, I guess, our divinity or our connectedness in him.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'd put down here was that passage. We brought it up Sunday briefly. It was 1 John 3:2, and in King James or probably the NRSVA is probably what I wrote down on here. But, beloved, now are we the sons of God.
Yes.
And it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. The way that Brother Francois puts it, in the mirror. Beloved, we know that we are children of God to begin with, which means that there can be no future surprises. His manifest likeness is already mirrored in us. Our sameness cannot be compromised or contradicted. Our gaze will confirm exactly who he is and who we are, and I would add who we and he have been all along.
Yeah.
Who we've all been all along. We finally see it because we see him, and it's not that I've gone through all of the things that John Calvin tells me to go through, and I've purified myself to the point of purification that now somehow I've earned my way into being one of the elect. No. When I see him, I'll realize he's looked like me all along. It's not me attempting to look like him, but I've done what Paul said, put ye on Christ.
Yes.
I wear him now, and it's not that I'm trying to look so much like him and more like him looking like me, but it's, again, this
why would you
mysterious,
think it's robbery to be equal?
Exactly. It's this,
Right.
It's this mysterious overlap and interlapping, but it's the same thing that Paul would say, Christ in you, the hope of glory, but also what Paul would say, us in him, that in him we live and move and have our being. So who is within whom? Well, it's both. It's both and. He lives in me and I live in him. And it's this connectedness, this intertwining, this true understanding of what incarnation was, which literally in its most basic Latin form, it's flesh. Word means in flesh. So it's God in flesh. So the purpose of him coming, you answered it. I think we've answered it to a degree.
I think we have.
But it's the point of knowing it, for one, within yourself, that God, the fullness of God, lives within my being.
Yes.
Not just for the purpose of being what it became for others over the years, and what it still becomes now, is this elitist, elevated, high view of yourself, to where you're untouchable, you're all-knowing, you are this, that, and the bag of chips. But it's for the purpose of doing exactly what Jesus said. That the first among you will be last, or he'll be the chiefest among you will be the servant to all. Mm-hmm. So for me to receive the ministry of reconciliation, it necessitates that I get down on my knees and I serve reconciliation to all of mankind.
Yes.
That I get down and I put on myself the same towel that Jesus donned himself with. Get down and wash the feet of humanity. And when I do so, just the same way that Jesus told Peter, if I don't do this, you have no part with me. But when I do this, you're part of me. When I wash the feet of humanity and I wash them in the waters of reconciliation, then I'm making them part of me, regardless of what path of life they are in, or whatever area of life they're in. When we kneel down and we wash the feet of humanity, they become part of us and we become part of them. Mm-hmm. I only had one last thing that I wanted to read that is from a George McDonald thing. Do you have anything that you want to throw in here?
The only thing that I would throw in right there, and I believe the bishop and I both threw this on the comment stream on Sunday, because great minds think alike. Jinx.
Echo.
Oh, echoes.
The gathering echo.
We're gathering echoes. Echoes. All right, so this is John 17:21 and 23, and I think it helps round out the thought a little bit more. And it reads from the
true Lord's Prayer.
From the Mirror translation. Ooh, good way of putting it. Yeah. I like that. We'll call it that. The true Lord's Prayer, verse 21. That they all may be one, exactly as you, Father, are mirrored in me and I in you, that they also will be exactly mirrored to be one in us. Then the entire world will believe and be persuaded about your mission upon my life. And I, the incarnate Word, have endued them with the same glorious esteem that you have given me, so that their oneness may mirror ours. I am in them as you are in me, and on this basis their seamless oneness may be entirely concluded. Thus, the world will acknowledge your commission upon my life and know that my love for them mirrors your love for me. And as a note that Francois made, and I thought this was beautiful too, there are two words that could be used. It's either Amy or Genomai. In these three verses, they use Amy, which is to be, as opposed to Genomai, which is to become. So just reiterating again your beautiful point that you made on Sunday. This is not a matter of earning it. It's not a matter of works. You can't become it. You have to come to the realization that you are and just be. You said you had one more thing.
Yeah, well, now you made me think of this other part that I put on here for some, but I'll try to get this done. But with what you're saying, 2 Timothy 2:11. The saying is sure: if we have died with him, we will also live with him. Yes. Romans 6:11. So you also must consider yourself dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. It's living in being, not living in becoming,
right.
Not waiting on me to die or waiting on him to somehow finalize some weird way of what he's already finished.
Check everything off the list.
It's done. It's done. No becoming, it's being. But I did have this that I, just because it's, my parent, like I said on Sunday, my parents got me this book, and I've just been ripping through it.
You want to rally and do another one?
I might have to.
And just pick up where we leave off here?
I might have to.
Let's do that. Because I think we're at a good spot.
This is a good one.
I think we're at a good spot, and I think this well just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and we can have more fun with this.
This is fun.
So I think ultimately why do we need DEI in church? Because we need to remember the divine beings we all are and act accordingly. And in doing so, we'll receive the knowledge and understanding that will get us to the place of enlightenment where we can share that with the four corners of the world and really meet our potential at accomplishing the Great Commission that our elder brother accomplished for us in reconciliation and gave to us to give to everyone else. Yeah. On that note, thank you all for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to our channels. We're both on Facebook at NTCFB, on the Gathering Echo YouTube channel. We also have Subsplash, where we will receive your offerings if you feel led to give into our ministry to keep us going and keep us afloat as we go through all of these different various obstacles and difficulties that the world seems to continue throwing our way.
We're 501c3, so all of your gifts are tax deductible. Tax
deductible, so you can write that off on your taxes and give the IRS a good nudge for it. Subsplash also gives you access to all of the other platforms that we stream and are available on. So if you don't have those, if you don't use those apps too much, we have other apps, including Apple TV, that you can utilize for that as well. We thank you all for your attention, staying with us, and we hope this interests you and intrigues you. If it does, get in the comments and let us know if there's something else you want us to explore, a mythology or a story or a tale or even a movie, because we get into just about everything up here. Let us know. Become interactive with us so we can be more interactive with you. And on that note, if you'll repeat after me, I love him.
I love him.
Because he first
loved me.
Thank you. Sunday. God bless you.